Yeah,
Hello there. How are you?
doing well. How you been?
That's fine. We had a big storm that was canceled.
They
I think,
canceled the storm?
I somehow think that these weathermen are in cahoots with hotel people and hardware stores and grocers. And so everybody was very happy yesterday because we haven't had much snow this winter, and they all were running to get all that stuff because they predicted almost a blizzard. I woke up this morning, there was nothing.
Where are you based again?
I'm in Needham, Massachusetts, which is outside of
Oh,
Boston.
yeah, that's right. I forgot. We're fellow Massachusettsans or whatever we are. Um, yeah, well, we had a corporate retreat last week and we had an employee who got stuck in Chicago and wasn't able to make it because of the
Wow.
storm. And
Wow.
then we were worried we were going to lose a few other people because we had people coming in from Colorado and Utah, and they were just getting hit like crazy. In fact, my parents live in Southern California and they didn't get snow right where they live, but there was snow on the Hollywood sign and right above.
Well, right, around Los Angeles, crazy.
Yeah, they did get a bunch of hail though in the backyard. Looked like it had snowed in the backyard. There was hail everywhere, thicker than I've ever seen it in my life. So, Gene, did you get any snow where you are?
No, but we had several days of bad weather.
Yeah, bad weather meaning good for California, meaning lots of rain, right?
Yeah, lots of rain and very cold, but no snow.
Yeah. Well, California needs the rain. Arizona was getting dumped on too. We need the rain. So it's great to get the rain when we can get it any way we can get it. But yeah, I wish we could transport some of the rain that Massachusetts gets over here to the western side of the US. We need a big pipeline to push it all this way.
Yeah, it's been an amazing winter all over the world. And I think we're going to have to do more about the environment. This is very unusual,
Yeah. Well, catch us up, Virginia. You had some homework to do last time. How is things going on your book?
Well, I must plead kind of, well, I'll tell you my process because I realize that's what it is. I'm really basically looking sort of for the thought leadership business, and I think the book will come from that. And in order to answer some questions that I have, even to get started with a lot of it, I've had to dig up a lot of like notes and journals from the past, at least in my own mind. And then I finally printed out your workbook. I started doing it online, and I'm not an
That's a lot of paper.
It is a lot of paper. But I'm glad that I did it. And I hope you don't mind if I have suggestions along the way. I'll pass them along.
Oh, please do. It's still in rough condition.
Well, and it's long. That's the thing that I noticed. It's long. So
it is. It's really long.
So just in the spirit of the truth, I've just been sort of organizing a lot of those things together, and I haven't been quite moving forward and actually with the writing yet. But it's getting there, and I think that's part of the process.
Great. Well, you're building the foundation.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping it is.
Now, has there been any progress with your contacts? You had people who wanted you to write the book and other people telling you should do it, and people that you were going to reach out to who could help you with potentially like a book deal or something. Has there been any progress on that front?
The last one that reached out to me, I really basically said that I would have to get back to them. I can't work under that kind of pressure. They wanted to get the thing written and out and everything in 6 weeks. And then they would own a lot of it. And I just was that was blocking me from doing a lot of other things. And finally what's putting everything, and then as for the other people, I haven't reached out to a lot of those people yet until I have what I could consider an intelligent conversation, which, I did. And the neuroscience brainwave entrainment woman, who's got 5 million people in her business and is wonderful, is keeping in touch with me.
Cool.
And she's the biggest, and she's the cornerstone of, and this is sort of, and it's helpful for me, I guess, to flesh it all out. But this is where I think I'm headed for, as the 75-year-old person in her work. She has a lot of younger people that can talk about their progress and stuff. And So she's reached out to me and sent me a couple of good offers for her work, to get to her work and get in touch with her, keep in touch with her, which is, I think, the biggest thing.
Mhm.
And so that's, it just kind of just was too much for what, has that ever happened to you in part of the process? So I've just been trying to take it one step at a time. And I'm not talking to a lot of the like the New York Times bestselling author guy. He's very lineal. And until I have like really hard crying things to talk to him, I'm just letting him alone, you know?
Mhm.
So that's kind of where I am with it.
Got it. Well, great. Well, before we talk to Jean and Kate, I wanted to share something that came up with one of my clients, and I'm going to use this whiteboard thing here. Let's see. Okay, has everybody seen this whiteboard?
Yes, seen it.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So
Yeah.
I've never really used this before. What I really want to do is I need to figure out how to like hook this up to like an iPad or something so I can actually draw with my hand rather than with the mouse, because this is going to be messy. So there's this question of where to begin a book and where to end a book. And this came up with this client of mine this week where we were trying to figure out, we kind of knew where his story began, but we were having trouble figuring out where the story should end. And part of the difficulty of figuring out where his story would end is that it's still being written. It's still going on in real time. And there's some really interesting things happening in his life right now. And so there was this question of, should I write the book assuming that we're going to get to the end soon, and by the time I write the book, then we'll be at the end of the book? Or do I cut it off somewhere else? And we ended up deciding that we would cut off his book earlier. And I wanted to go through this and explain why, because I think this might be helpful to some of you and other people who will watch this later. So every book, nonfiction type book, and by the way, his book is kind of like, you could say like business memoir or something. If you've read Bad Blood about Elizabeth Holmes, it's kind of similar to that, or his story is similar to that. So it's a real story. It's what really happened to him, but it needs to follow a typical story arc. And so if we have a beginning, it starts out with some context and background, and that's just kind of building a foundation. It's not super exciting, but it's important information to know who everybody is and where everybody came from and why these people are in the story. And so we're kind of building that foundation. And then things start getting really exciting, and this tension builds and the excitement builds, and there's some really dramatic ups and downs coming in this story. And then things really start to get crazy. And then there's a point where there's kind of this close. And for him, the close is when he sells out. He leaves this business and he gets bought out and he goes on to the next thing. Well, after that happens, there's still a lot of exciting things that are happening in his life. But as far as the reader is concerned, and as far as the excitement level and the tension's concerned, it's going down like this. I mean, right now he's dealing with a lot of lawyers and there's a lot of litigation going on and there's drama and stuff. But does anybody want to read 100 pages about a lawsuit that's going on? Well, maybe, but not if it comes after all this big stuff that happened right here, because this is the real story. And so we talked about, and the hard part for him as the author is he's saying, yeah, there's all this exciting stuff right here in the middle, but all this stuff here at the end, this is really important and this is really exciting. And there's some really interesting stuff going on here. And so how can we deal with that type of stuff as authors and say, I don't want to leave this out because it seems like it's so interesting, and yet I don't know if it really fits in my book. And so one option is you put it in the epilogue. So you say, okay, I've got my introduction over here at the beginning. That's background and context. I've got the meat of the book, which is all the exciting, crazy stuff, dramatic stuff that went on. And then there's this other stuff, and I'll summarize that in the epilogue. So it's not like I'm ignoring it. I'm putting it in the epilogue. It goes somewhere. And if people want to know a little bit more about what happened after all the dramatic stuff, they can read the epilogue and they'll get that there. The other option is you write a second book. You say, hey, this stuff here, this might get really exciting again. And maybe that's worthy of a second book and essentially a sequel to your first book. And that's how I was able to get him over this hump of he didn't want to let go of these exciting things going on. And yet at the same time, I could see that he knew that the end of his book was right here. This is where the book should really end. And so the way I got him off of that was to say, you don't have to give up on this. Let's just put it in a second book. Let's just write about it later. You can always do a sequel. And he said, okay. And mentally, he was able to disconnect from that and say, okay, I feel good. And we can proceed with writing the book that's about this experience here. So if you're writing your book and it's that type of memoir type book, it's a story and it has to follow a typical story arc where you have the hero and the villain, and the hero confronts challenges and overcomes them. And then he returns to where he was at the beginning. There's that standard story arc. If that's part of your book, then the part where it ends is that after that big climax, whenever the villain is vanquished, when Harry Potter defeats Voldemort, when Bilbo Baggins gets, I can't remember how The Hobbit ends exactly, or Lord of the Rings. Anyway, you watch any of these stories, they defeat the villain. Well, that's the end of the story. His issue is the villain gets defeated kind of here, but then he kind of goes on doing some other stuff here. And that made it hard for him to let go because the villain's still there, but then again, he's not, because our hero walked away from the business and sold out of the business. And so he's not really there. So any questions about that?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
How important, so all of your examples, Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, these are fiction books. For nonfiction business books, how important is it to have a story arc and characters? For example, your 60 Days to LinkedIn Mastery. Did you try to incorporate story arc elements and characters and climax in that?
I didn't. So with, let's see, how do I do a new whiteboard? Is there like a new?
Because the next book I was going to write, I was working on almost two ideas simultaneously. One was the one that I'm kind of working on, exactly what to say in China. But the previous idea was After the Chinese Honeymoon, which was my original attempt to try to incorporate characters and a story arc. But ultimately, both books are almost trying to teach the business reader almost the same lessons. It's just one is going to try to do it through stories and characters, and the other is going to be more like 60 Days to LinkedIn Mastery.
Right. So it depends on the format of the book. So in my book, the LinkedIn book, I tried to include lots of stories, but they're just short individual, really short stories because my chapters are really short. So I never had a story that continued beyond one of the chapters. And I don't think I had any chapter that was longer than 2 or 3 pages. And so my stories were just short things. And so it's kind of, if you look at my book, it's like, here's a story. And then maybe the next few chapters don't have a story. Here's another story. Here's another story. But it follows that.
But they're like separate independent stories. There's no continuity to characters and character development.
Exactly. So that wasn't the type of book I was writing. And so if you're writing a book, however, that follows, if it's more historical, if you're telling a story from beginning to end, and the beginning of the story is the beginning of your book, and the end of the book is the end of your story, then it really does need to follow that arc. It needs to follow that pattern, but it just depends on what type of book you're writing. My client's book is historical. It's nonfiction, but it's what happened to him, and it has a starting point and an ending point. And so it needs to follow a story arc, and we have to develop that. We have to figure out who's the villain, or what circumstances are the villain, or what's the challenge that the hero faces. But
so my question would be, my consideration would be from the perspective of the reader. If I, like for your LinkedIn book, all the chapters are kind of like, they have little story elements inside them. They're unrelated. There's no climax. There's no character development. But each chapter is kind of actionable, which means the reader will get some value out of reading each chapter separately.
Right.
That's one way to write a book, a business book. And the other way would be to try to teach all of those lessons through somebody who was having complete non-success using LinkedIn to where he has started incorporating these, and then and then it shows the outcome of his success through LinkedIn. And the question is, which type of book would be more valuable to a reader, in your case, who's just trying to maximize LinkedIn?
Right. And that's a good question. I mean, one question is, what kind of book would do better, perform better, attract more attention? Another one is, which kind of book do I want to write as the author? Or what do I feel comfortable writing?
Did you make a conscious decision not to tie all the chapters together in a story arc?
I wouldn't say that I made a conscious decision, but if you had asked me in the middle of writing, I would have said, no, I'm not going to tie these chapters together in a story arc. It's going to be.
And what would have been your reason why you wouldn't do that?
Because I didn't want to go to the effort, because I felt like it was good enough as it was. And really, I was writing a book that I wanted somebody to be able to pick it up, look through the table of contents and say, oh, this thing looks interesting, and be able to go and read that one chapter and get all the value with that one chapter and not need any other chapter. Now, if I were trying to be clever, I could have said, well, I can do that, and I can weave these things together in a story arc and connect all these together. But I don't feel like that was needed. I mean, maybe it would make it more fun. Maybe the book would sell a little bit better. Maybe it'd sell a lot better. I don't know. But I felt like it was good enough as it was that I wasn't going to try to figure out how to do that. It would have been,
so that
for
is
me, it would have been too much brain damage at the wrong time.
So that is the other question. If your LinkedIn book your LinkedIn book became a bestseller. So
Right.
Would it have done any better had you marketed it as having characters in a story arc?
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. It could have. There are a lot of books out there, business books that are narrative nonfiction, where they have a story in there and it's a business principle. I mean, what's his name? Lencioni. Lencioni's like the guy for this, right? I think he has like 20 of these books that are business books, but it's all always within a story. Another big one is Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Group, is another famous one that it's a story, but it teaches business principles. And I like some of those books, and some of those books, I feel like they're kind of cheesy sometimes. And I feel like I would rather just get the business book version of it. But sometimes the stories help to illustrate the point. I think the stories are very helpful when it's something that's hard to grasp unless you see it implemented in the real world. And then the story can really help things. And some of Lencioni's books are like that because, for example, he has a book, can't remember what it's called, but he talks about hiring the right kind of team player. And he says they need to be hungry, humble, and smart. Well, what does that mean for somebody to be hungry, humble, and smart? And you could describe what hungry, humble, and smart mean, but it does really help to see it within a story. And he shows characters who are really hungry, humble, and smart, and some who are hungry, but not very humble, and some who are smart, but not hungry and humble. And he goes through all these different characters within this story, and you really get a feel for, oh, okay, I get what he's saying. And now I have a clear idea of the type of people I want to hire because he's helped me understand what it means to be hungry, humble, and smart through this story, probably in a way that never would have come across as well if there weren't the story there to accompany it. But telling stories well is certainly a talent. It's a lot easier to lay things out in a standard business book format. It's hard to create a story that's interesting and that people are going to find engaging and not get bored with or not feel like is cheesy or something. So it's hard, and that's probably why most people don't do it, but it can be helpful, I think, in the right circumstances.
All right, something to think about.
Yeah. I don't know if I'll ever take that on myself. Maybe I will someday. I would rather write an all fiction book and an all business book than try to weave them together, but I might eat my words one of these days. Maybe I'll try my hand at writing one of those and see how it goes.
Yeah.
But first, I got to get the workbook done. So, priorities.
All right.
Hey, Cade, did you want to chime in at all today? Or are you just here to hang out?
I'd like to chime in. I've got a question for you. I'm going through the workbook and I'm getting the content, and I'm realizing that my book could benefit from interviewing people. And I've often toyed around with the idea of a podcast in this space. There's very little, it's probably 3, and they're not doing, anyway, very little competition, very little information out there. And so I'm curious on your thoughts on podcasting and how it fits into this framework, right? By no means in anywhere in the workbook do you say what has to come first, right? Which part has to come first, but yeah, I'm just finding I need more case studies, and I think a podcast way is a great way to get those case studies and to learn. Yeah, there's just a lot of overlapping things that would roll into a podcast for me where I'm at right now.
Yeah. I think it's such a good idea to do a podcast and associate it with a book that I'm trying to launch a podcast management agency that focuses on authors. I'm not trying very hard, but it's there. But yeah, I think it's great. I mean, you can use a podcast in 2 ways. You can use it if you already have a book to market your book and talk to people about what's already in your book, but you can also launch a podcast in order to write a book. Like you said, you're going to be on the phone with these people anyway, talking to them. You might as well record it and stick it out there as a podcast. It can only help. It'll help you grow an audience. It'll help you find more people to interview. It's a great tool. And it's not that much additional work once, I mean, you're already doing the phone call anyway. That's the main, and you have to schedule it and all that. That's the main amount of work. And then you can find somebody pretty cheap to edit it. If you want to go like really bare bones, you can find somebody really cheap to edit your podcast and do a good enough job to put it out there. And I think the nice thing about a podcast too is if you call somebody or you email somebody and you say, hey, I'd love to talk to you and interview you for a book that I'm writing, that's good. And you'll get more responses from that than if you were just to say, hey, I'd like to pick your brain about something. But a podcast, for some reason, everybody wants to be on podcasts. And if you say, hey, we're on the such and such podcast, I'd love to have you on, there are amazing people that will just be like, yep, no questions asked. Yeah, I want to be on. Great. They'll never ask you what your audience is or how many episodes you have or anything. They'll just be like, oh yeah, I'd love to. And so I think it's just a great tool to get through to people that you otherwise wouldn't be able to talk to. And plus you can say, hey, it's an hour-long podcast, and they'll be like, okay. Whereas if you said, I'd like to have an hour-long phone call and pick your brain, they'd be like, how about like 10 minutes or something? But you say a podcast, they're like, oh yeah, great.
Okay. With that, I noticed your setup, Mike, like I've been looking for recommendations, and it feels like there's just such a smattering of resources all across the board. And it's almost like overwhelming. Like everyone's like, no, you need this. And I guess I probably just need to try it and see if I'm good enough with the sound quality. And
yeah, I have a podcast equipment list, and I know there are a ton of other people who have them too. I'll put a link to it here in the chat.
that'd be awesome. Thank you.
This is I mean, I would say this is outdated, except that it's the stuff I'm still using and it works great. So maybe there's something slightly better out there, but I mean, you can hear me, the sound's good.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd probably buy some different things or try to figure out a little bit different setup. But what I have has worked for me for years, and it's worked great. And I can't complain about anything that I've got. The one thing I see on there is that I have headphones, and I don't even use headphones because this mic filters everything out and I don't get any feedback. So I just don't use headphones anymore because I'm in an environment where I don't need to have
Sure.
headphones on to for anybody else's sake. And then they mess up my hair and stuff. So and make my ears sore. So I just don't use them anymore, but.
Okay.
Hey,
Awesome.
Kate, I'd also like to just share my experience. I have a podcast, not a ton of subscribers, but I basically recorded 10 episodes of a season of a podcast, and those 10 episodes became 10 chapters of the book that I published. So it was a great way to hearing yourself in a podcast actually helps you imagine how the book will read. And that was very beneficial, and kind of telling me that this makes sense. These 10 episodes do create a story arc. So my first book has a story arc. It has characters, and they were developed through 10 chapters where I presented 10 concepts, and it made writing the book easier because the 10 episodes of the podcast just became the 10 chapters of the book.
Awesome. Thanks, Gene.
And I also use very just basic equipment, spending less than $200 on everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and I spent slightly more than 200, but not much more. I mean, I think the most money I spent was on this mic. And the difference between this mic and a $60 mic is not that big of a deal. So you can get like an Ars Technica mic, I think for $60 or $70 or something. And it's fine. I mean, it's definitely good enough. Yeah, there was, I was going to say something else about podcasting, but I forgot it. So.
And also the mics now, you don't even need an audio interface. It's just USB direct. So you don't need the audio cables, instrument cables. You just need a podcasting mic, and it basically just USB direct record. And then you just give that audio file to your Fiverr freelancer, and they'll post-produce it for you.
Yep. Yeah. And my mic does use a little bit of equipment in between it and the computer. When I first got it and I plugged it in, people said it was too quiet. And so I got this device called a cloud lifter that helps things. I don't know why that's necessary. I just know that there's a box and it fixes the problem I had. But the Ars Technica $70 mic that I had, yeah, that was just direct USB into my computer, and it was fine pretty much by itself too. I just wanted to get fancy with this thing.
Yeah, if you fall in love with podcasting, then eventually you start upgrading your equipment. But when you get started and you want to do that season 1, you don't really need to do much.
I do like the boom arm like Gene and I have, and not just because it looks cool, but it is just handy for being able to put the mic right where you want it. Because if you have a mic stand, like I talk with my hands a little bit and you don't see it because it's below here, so you don't see my hands waving around. But if I had the mic on my desk sitting there, I'd probably knock it over 10 times during these coaching sessions. So like the Blue Yeti mic is on a stand and it sits on your desk. Don't get a Blue Yeti mic, by the way. They're directional. They pick up stuff from all over the place, so you hear every background noise. This mic here, my family can be running the blender outside the door and people will be like, oh, I don't hear anything. And I'm like, that's amazing, because I can't hear myself talk, but they can hear me talk just fine and they don't hear anything in the background. But I love the arm because it's just, I can just move the mic quickly in and out of the way and then put it exactly where I want it. And it stays there and I'm not hitting it with my hands or anything. Although sometimes it is in the way of the monitor that I'm trying to look at, but.
Awesome. Thank you both. That's good insights. So
you might already know this, all of you, but I was told this by the Harvard Business School, that podcasting is the way of the future, and to get in on it now, because this is the ground floor and everybody's going to be headed that way. So it's really a smart thing to do, to get in on it now.
And I agree with that. I think there's ups and downs. I mean, we had a big podcast boom several years ago, and then they kind of disappeared, and then they came back. And then now again, you have people saying podcasts are dying. And it's a cycle thing that you end up with everybody talking about it. And then you have a bunch of people who rush in. And so that's when you get all the articles saying podcasting is exploding. Well, you're getting a lot of people rushing in and recording 1 or 2 episodes, a lot of people doing low quality content, and then they give up and then they leave. And then everybody says, oh, podcasting is dying. Well, but every time that happens, there are some people who do a really good job and stick with it and build a huge audience. I just got a call from a group of guys the other day, and they do a fitness podcast, and they're doing millions of downloads a month with this fitness podcast that they launched just a year or 2 ago. And so there are people launching podcasts today, and there will be people launching podcasts a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, and getting huge. It's just, yeah, most people are going to fail, but some people will succeed. And there's different types of podcasts, right? I mean, some people will do a 10 episode podcast or 25 episodes, and that's it. It's a one-time type of thing. And then they check that box and say, I'm done. And there are other people who are recording thousands of podcasts, and they go on for years and years. There's no right way for it to look. It's whatever works for you and your audience.
Can we give the name of somebody who gives good free information classes about this?
Definitely.
There's a man named Michael Neely, Kneely, and he's an expert on it, and he gives all kinds of challenges free, like for 5 days, he'll give different lessons. But what I like about him a lot is that he talks about the monetizing of it, and he's very well known. So.
All right. That's probably more than you wanted to know, Cade, but hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Well, anybody else got stuff they want to talk about their books?
One of the other things I've been doing is reading Jared Kushner's book, and the book about the Prince Harry Spare.
Mm-hmm.
Looking, and I'm sure they've both been working with ghostwriters, and what I'm analyzing them for is the way, and I recognize they all have marketing, and then they have their own fame and everything that pushes stuff across. But I've been looking for the current what's selling currently. In other words, the way they're setting it up, what they're doing. I'm thinking that by looking at that, you can see how the best ghostwriters are working. Is that a good use of time?
Reading books to see how the best ghostwriters do it, you mean? Reading those ghostwritten books?
Those types of books.
Yeah.
Those would be the best. And then the next one that I have, and will be the last one that I'll be comparing, is written by the publisher that wants to buy my book. And it's similar information about what my book would be about. And so I figured that will tell me what they're looking for, what of my information I should emphasize, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to, we talk about the concept of a hero book a lot, having a book that you look at and you want to emulate when you write your book, or having multiple hero books that you say, I like how this book does this. I like this book cover. I like this book introduction. I like the style of writing in this book. It's great to have those examples so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you can go back to that book and say, how did they do this? And you can look at how they did it and say, okay, that's the way I want to do it, or I want to do it a little bit differently, or whatever. Spare was written by J.R. Moehringer, who's the world's highest paid ghostwriter. He also wrote Shoe Dog, which is Phil Knight, the founder of Nike's book, which is excellent. And he also wrote Open, which is Andre Agassi's memoir. And so he's gone up. I think he got paid something like $250,000 for Andre Agassi's book, and then $500,000 for Shoe Dog, and he got paid over $1 million for Spare. So he's doing pretty okay as a ghostwriter. He's like the LeBron James or whatever of ghostwriters. But he's obviously good at his craft and knows what he's doing. And so I think it's great to read his work and look at how he wrote things and how he structured what he does and how he captures that. I really like reading David McCullough is one of my author heroes. and I love his writing style and how he lays out history, nonfiction history books. And but when I'm writing a book, typically I'll go look for a few different hero books and say, I'm writing this book, I'm going to go find a similar book and see how they wrote it. So for example, I'm working on my memoir about how we adopted my daughter from China. And so I've been using the book Educated by Tara Westover as my hero book. Now, her book's about growing up on a farm in Idaho and being out in the middle of nowhere and abusive brother and crazy experiences growing up at home, like kind of the survivalist. Like the content is completely different from my book. There's no similarity in the terms of the content or even the types of stories she's telling. But I just really like the way she structured her book and the way that she tells stories and the way that she moves from one chapter to the next. And so that's why I'm looking at her book. And I think it's a good length. And my book's already way too long. So I'm thinking, okay, how did she trim it down? What did she cover? What did she leave out? And so I'm looking at her book that way as I write my book and using her book as a bit of a guide.
I think that Spare is way too long. And so this is really, really helping me today because when you said about the foundation, I think that I actually am working towards this. But in terms of like sitting right down now and writing the stuff, that's not happening. But I think the rest of these pieces are part of the work. Would you agree?
Yeah. I just looked it up, by the way. It's 416 pages, and I can tell you that's absolutely too long.
Oh, it's way too long. And I'm looking at those kinds of, but I was really surprised at that because I said, this guy's supposed to be a hotshot. And to me, for this type of book, that's way too long.
Yeah, 250 to 300 maybe. And I mean, J.R. Moehringer as the ghostwriter doesn't have ultimate control over the book. The publisher controls the book. And so he may have turned in a manuscript and said, hey, here's everything I wrote. It's kind of like the director's cut of a movie, right? Here's everything. You take it and you edit it as you see fit. And then the publisher hires an editor to come in and cut things. And so I would really blame the publisher and the editor more than the ghostwriter, because I seriously doubt the ghostwriter had control over it or that he intended it to be that long. He probably just said, I'm going to turn in everything and let them deal with figuring out what to cut. Why they would release it with that many pages, I don't know. Maybe they make more money off a book that's thick. But yeah, in terms of readability, I would say that book probably should be about somewhere between 200 and 250 pages, maybe pushing towards 300 if it's really interesting. But 416, I can just tell that's a long book for a young guy.
Well, and I keep saying as I go along certain sections, enough of this, I want to get to the next area of his life.
You're feeling it. You're feeling the length of it before you even feel the length of it. Because that's an editing problem. Somebody didn't edit that the right way. If you feel that way, because really what you want to be feeling is, oh my gosh, this is so exciting and I can't wait to read the next page. And then you get to the end and you're like, that was so interesting. I want more. I wish there were more of this book, rather than, oh, finally I finished it.
And I've been very surprised at Kirshner's book. I didn't think he was really that bright. And, so really, so it's, you never know, do you? But what I think it's telling me, because
you mean you didn't think he was bright before you read the book or after you read the book?
No, I didn't think he was that bright before I read the book.
Okay. So he's smarter. He's turning out to be smarter than you thought he was.
He's turning not only to be smarter, but he's turning out to be a better human being than I thought he was, and I really, so I enjoyed it. I was really surprised at that.
That's interesting. That might speak to the power of our news media to sway our opinions about people.
Or that may also speak to the power of a ghostwriter to shape the opinions of the readers by writing a narrative in a certain way.
These are the kinds of things that I'm looking at, because a lot of the stuff that I studied before, I'm in another generation. So what I'm trying to do is look for what's selling now and how people are positioning ideas now. Mm-hmm. And I have to say that I have been very impressed by the way he handled Trump. Trust me, I know what guys like that are like to live with. And it's like sometimes walking on eggshells to get them to do things. And
I can't imagine what that must have been like. I mean, if you look at Trump, everybody around him quits or leaves at some point. But when you're family, what do you do? I mean, some of his family has quit too. But yeah, for him to stay around and apparently to be on good terms with Trump and yet actually get stuff done and not just be a yes man.
Well,
Yeah.
it's that kind of stuff that I'm seeing. And the other thing is he and Ivanka were the last resorts. I mean, they were the two that could manage Trump. Nobody else could manage Trump. Even Ivana, his wife. I mean, and of course she's passed away. But they would come running for the hills to get those two when there was something big going on because he's so volatile.
Yeah.
So, but what I was amazed because I was I'm very familiar with the world of Wall Street at the at the peak and in the egos and the stuff you have to do. And I really was impressed with this kid. I thought that he might have just been a sort of rich boy, yes man, that kind of stuff, and he's not. Plus he has his own he has a lot of religious beliefs and stuff like that, which it's a whole conversation of another thing and contribution to the world. But and he had to deal with his own very difficult father. Maybe that's how he learned. But all in all, if I had to put the writing of those two together, I would be with the Kushner people.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that opinion, because I'm not anti-Trump. I'm not pro-Trump, but I wasn't sure about Jared either. So it's interesting to get that perspective on him.
And the way he presents things that he said when he was in the rooms with the Russians and the Chinese, the way it's all presented is very different than the news. And the same thing from the Prince's book. This I do like, and I admire him more too, from the book, The Prince. How he talks about how he felt about things that they put, that the way the media puffed up stories about him during different times and their agendas and what really happened and how he felt. He does an excellent job in that, I have to say. And I really, I like him a lot more after the book, Harry. So at any rate, not so much like admire that there's a lot more to him than I thought before too. So that's, I think, and then I think it's a very good point to get across in books, don't you? That who the person really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it certainly takes talent to do that, whether you're writing about yourself or somebody else. It's sometimes hard to express who we are, the real us, and present that in a way that gets the point across to our readers. But that's what we're here for, is to figure out how to do that.
You were talking about David McCullough. He is a pal with this New York Times guy I was telling you about. That might hook me up with they're both historical fiction writers.
Yeah.
And I think he's dead now, McCullough.
Yeah, he passed away just like a year ago, maybe less than a year.
That's what I thought. But he would talk about a gentleman. Boy, that guy had it in spades.
Yeah, he was a national treasure. And I'm sorry we lost him. And I wish I knew which. I'm sure there's a list somewhere of all the books he was still working on when he passed away. And I hope somebody who's worth their salt can finish those up. But he was excellent.
I bet somebody will, because he was in with a first-class community, and somebody in that community would not let that go. I don't think.
He passed away last August 7th. That's
what I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, one of my favorite writers of all time, for sure. Well, great. Was there anything else, Virginia or Jean, that I can help you out with, or that you want to chat about?
No, I just chiming in. You know, it's good to stay connected with writers if one of your goals is writing.
Yep.
And also, this is a wonderful discipline too, to now, you helped me, because for a while my head was like spinning with all these different things, but to know that I really am on the right track with doing some work, and now the next business with getting the journals and things together and putting it together. I guess one thing that's coming up, that woman that I told you about that's keeping in touch with me, that has 5 million people. I'm in another group online with 5,000 women. And I'm wondering how I can use that, those Facebook groups to get information.
Well, I guess what kind of information do you need?
Once I start to get some of the topics and things about what the woman might enjoy, not and benefit from the other person's work. And she also, by the way, has now been included as a speaker in this other $5,000, $5,000 attendee group. So I didn't know if once I get down the line and I'm testing ideas, if I could use those Facebook. I guess what I'm saying is I don't really know how to benefit from Facebook groups.
Well, it depends on the group. Some groups are great, some groups are dead. And I've had experience with plenty of both. If it's an active group and people actually answer questions, then it's a great place to test out ideas or test out theories that you might have. So whether it's, hey, I'm thinking of writing a book on XYZ topic, what do y'all think? Those responses will be interesting. I wouldn't necessarily bank too much on random people's opinions of your idea, but I feel like it's always helpful to get more information from people, because sometimes people make a suggestion, you're like, oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to tweak my book idea that way. And so I think it's nice to get feedback. And if you can test out specific ideas from your book, if you have a specific formula or theory or idea, and you want to see if other people agree or what they think about it, then I love groups for testing that type of stuff out to say, hey, I think this works this way. This is my experience, but I'm curious to hear from other people if they've had similar experiences. And if people come back with different stuff, then again, sometimes that tweaks my idea about how things might work. And I think, oh, maybe I need to write this a different way. And it can also help you save you from traps, because sometimes you share part of your book and somebody will say, oh, so-and-so over here, they already wrote a book all about this. And you're like, I didn't know that. And if I'm putting this in my book, I better go read what they wrote. Otherwise, people are going to say, how can you write about this without having read this other book that's all about that? So it's good for just being aware of what's out there sometimes.
That's already happened. With
Yeah, I think
Go ahead.
just share some experience. I think what Josh said in the beginning is probably the key. It depends on the group, because you would think the group has to be really, really aligned with your very specific niche in order for it to be helpful.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just a community of random people that aren't even aligned with the message that you want to send. And like for me, my niche is my overall niche is obviously China. So my very specific niche is, how do we as non-Chinese people or Westerners communicate more effectively with Chinese people? I'm in tons of communities and groups that deal with quote unquote China, but none of those people really care about what I'm specifically talking about. They care about doing business with China. They care about being friendly to China, or they care about bashing China, or they care about something related to China that's unrelated to my book. And the larger the group is, the less you'll actually make a connection that's meaningful. So what I've actually shifted to is just, I don't pay a lot of attention to the Facebook groups, because for me, there's no ROI. The higher ROI just comes from LinkedIn, where you can engage with posts of people who are talking about things that you actually care about and build those relationships. And then they will start seeing your post in their feeds. And it's almost like LinkedIn helps you scrape the people who might be more interested in your stuff through their internal algorithm. And then the people that are connected with you on LinkedIn are the ones that you put a post and they're likely to comment. Or if you've had repeated engagement with somebody, you can just tag them in your post and then they'll give you a comment. As opposed to going to a Facebook group with 400,000 members and just posting something and hoping somebody sees it, finds this interesting, and gives you something helpful, which is almost never.
Well, no, I really appreciate that that comment. It's great. And I also love your topic, because there's a big need for it, that a lot of Westerners don't have a clue. And then on the other side of it, some of the Chinese people don't have a clue what to expect from Westerners. So what you're doing kind of meshes them. It's great.
Yeah. Well, as much as being written and said about China, it seems like the important thing of how do we help the two sides better understand each other is not being written enough about. So that's what I'm doing.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's a wonderful topic, a wonderful topic. And that group of 5,000, they're all keyed into this topic. I wouldn't even get into a Facebook group about it that wasn't, but there. And as I said, she's going to be a guest speaker and all of this. So I guess what's really been very, very helpful to me is I just have all this stuff in my head. I'm working on different pieces, and I'm very glad it sounds like at least I'm on the right track.
Yeah. So the strategy for a group that where most people are already aligned with what you're interested in is try to scrape the people who are interested in engaging off. What does that mean? That means you have 5,000 people. So when you post something, just keep track of the people who actually comment. And then, like, let's just say you make 3 or 4 posts, one a week, about something that you really care about. And let's just say you get 15 comments total. Well, what I would do is I would create a separate group just for those 15 people. And they would be kind of like a, like a group that is more willing to engage with you about these things. And then you can even offer them things. For example, when I scrape these people off of LinkedIn, I get them into online events where I actually offer them an opportunity to become a co-author from my book. And then that gets them even further engaged because now they almost don't have to do anything and they can be a co-author of a book. And then the people who I've offered to become co-authors of my book, these are the people who provide real feedback. These are the people who provide real testimonials. These are the people who actually comment on the things that I now post on LinkedIn because now they feel like they're part of the process. But what you got to do is you got to scrape 10 or 15 people out of that 5,000 who are willing to take this quote unquote journey with you to finish this book, to be potential co-authors and to be part of that book.
It's brilliant. Seriously, that is really quite an amazing process. And wow, thank you for sharing it. No, really, that's terrific. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And thank you for your comment on my book too.
Oh, there is so much need for that in the world. It's just, and we've all got to start doing something with this coming together because I have never seen the world in such a mess and I'm pretty old.
Yeah.
And it is, we've got to either start coming together or we're, I was on a business call the other day with some very successful people, and somebody talked about the old company process of knowing your employees' needs and meeting some of those as a good employee. And that was originally how this country was built, that the employees took excellent care of you and you took excellent care of them. That simple.
Yep.
And we've got to start getting some of that back. And I remember a very successful financial company that actually had the people write down sort of their dream job, or what skills and things they liked. And then he tried to incorporate them into the current job that they had now. And it just boom, right to the top with motivation.
Yeah. One of the things that I've learned from a lot of mentors, including mentors like Josh, is whether you're podcasting or creating content or writing a book, you always should have a purpose or a why to why you're doing this. And I'm ethnically Chinese, even though I'm born in America. So my why is just to improve US-China relationships one individual at a time. I'm trying to reach an individual who has biases, misperceptions, or just a lack of understanding of the other side. And if I could help one person one at a time, that's kind of like my mission and purpose. Because I don't have enough influence to influence geopolitics, but I can try to help individual relationships through business one at a time.
Very much needed as tensions keep ratcheting higher and higher, it seems like.
And people with other agendas. And I'm sure that the Chinese government is behind a lot of things that the Chinese people do not like, but they have to comply. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but so I think it's good to know sort of the basic things that real Chinese people want. And I think some of it might be not to have to put up with some of the Chinese government stuff, I might be getting,
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, we don't want to go too far, but the key is really just don't judge people by the government that's behind them. Just treat
No,
everybody as
well,
an
that's, no,
individual.
that's my point. No, that's all I'm
Yeah.
saying. I know we don't want to touch that one,
Yeah.
but I believe, I really believe that many of the people would prefer not to have to live that way. And knowing who they really are and what they really want, I think would be a tremendous catalyst in helping people.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm working on. So
So it's great. It's
Yeah.
great. From your lips to God's ears, really.
thank you.
Well, thank you, Virginia. Thank you, Jean, for being here, and thank you for being such great supporters. And by the way, next week, I'm going to implement the open working, whatever we call it, hour that comes after this. So next week, we're going to do this coaching just like normal. But as it winds down, I'm just going to have another hour where I leave the camera on and I'm going to work on the workbook. And if anybody wants to show up and just work on their book at the same time, and then if they happen to have a random question at any moment, they can just say, hey, I've got a question real quick as I'm working on my book. But it's just an opportunity for a group of us to work together on the book and say, I'm signing up, I'm blocking out this time, and I'm actually going to work on something during this time. And you can ask questions if stuff comes up while you're working on it.
I think it's
So
great.
we'll start
Sounds
that.
good. Look forward to seeing the
Oh,
announcement.
next week we block off 2 hours instead of 1.
Right. If you want to stay around, I mean, there's
Sure.
no obligation to stick around, but if you've got stuff to work on and it helps you to have that time blocked out, then great. I'm going to block it out for myself, and I'm inviting anybody else to block it out and come along.
No, I think it's a great idea, and it's also incentive to get things organized and prepared for that time.
Yeah.
So again, thank you and thank you for this group. It's really a wonderful, wonderful opportunity.
All right. Thanks, Jean. Thanks, Virginia. We'll talk to you later. Have a great
All right.
week.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.